what would Karl Popper have thought about Elon Musk? What would the conversation between Popper and Musk look like? I want to use this question as a sort of introduction to this formal review of The Open Society and Its Enemies book I just finished reading. So let me first explain. I think I want to do this a little bit more sort of transactional, meaning, okay, what would Karl Popper actually say about what's going on today, and in particular Elon Musk in our portfolio? And are we on the right path in terms of what we think about him and David Deutsch, who is sort of the modern incarnation of Karl Popper? Or what are the ideas, what are the philosophies? And because his writing is, let's call it, a little bit heavy, a little bit, intellectually laden with jargon, and that's fine. I give him a pass on that because he also had a profession to protect and a status to protect within the academic community and all that. So I'm okay with all that. So, but I want to do this a little bit more interactively. So just before I go, for new listeners, we discuss books here all the time because reading is not just some pastime of hedge fund managers. It is the business of running a hedge fund. The knowledge business is a business of creativity, of thinking ahead, thinking differently, trying to use our power of thinking and our power of interpretation, which is, by the way, not just our frontal cortex type thinking, but whatever it is that we humans have, which is a part of our creativity, which is actually being discussed in Karl Popper's book, whatever that is, we need to harness that in order to try to generate excess returns, which is really our goal. The purpose of Orange Capital Partners is to generate wealth by investing in fundamentally new concepts and engineering practices. So all of these things have one underlying factor which is driving all of them, and that is freedom. And that is the core concept of what Karl Popper is trying to convey in his epistemology. This is the beginning of my conversation. Hopefully I can be a bit more clear and illuminate what I mean with that. This is not even on podcast. It's May 26, 2022. This is Krim Delco. Since the last update, we're up 6.9%. The market's up 4%. For the year, we're down 43.4%. The market is down 15%. We're underperforming by 28.4%. So The Open Society and Its Enemies by Karl Popper is fundamentally a book about epistemology. It's about the science of knowledge. How do we actually harness knowledge? And before we even go there, there's also a couple of questions. Let's say, fundamentally, actually, I don't want to be entangled in the definition of what is knowledge or how do we harness knowledge or any of that stuff, because I think this would be pretty much in line with what Karl Popper thinks, because I think it's a lot more important to think about the purpose of knowledge. What is the actual purpose? Why are we even engaging in this? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And then I want to talk a little bit about how Popper would think about Elon Musk. So let's talk about, I think instead of trying to define what knowledge is, let's just talk about the purpose of knowledge is to improve society a little bit. And that improvement is really, when it really boils down to, is to increase freedom. And that in itself is, again, okay, what is freedom? Freedom is the thing that lets you do what it's innately you, what you as a person or you as a tribe or society or country, what you're willing to do, what you feel like naturally you want to be doing. So if you have anything that can increase the freedom a little bit, is actually a good thing. And let me discuss that a little bit more. So Popper sees almost everything like that. So his epistemology, let's say the theory of science itself, is also, look, we don't want to quarrel about is this theory right or wrong. It is just about everything that can improve the scientific community a little bit, or the knowledge of the scientific community a little bit, is worth pursuing. And then also this whole question of falsibility and what is the scientific method and all of that, it is really not so important. What's really important is that we have a certain discourse within the scientific community about, okay, what ideas can improve the situation in thermodynamics, for example, or in engineering or in history or wherever. And this is the fundamental point of Popper. And the big pushback, of course, is, well, good or better is subjective. So what you think is good or better, other people might not think. Elizabeth Warren might have a different idea of what is a little bit better, how our society is a little bit better off than, let's say, Elon Musk. So how do we reconcile that? And I think the key to that is that there is an objective way. There is actually an objective way to improve society. uh, Again, I understand that everybody has their self-interest. I mean, I've been trained in political economy by Professor Frey in Zurich, and also in Chicago by people like Gary Becker. So I absolutely understand that there's self-interest involved, and maximizing your personal utility function and all of these things. However, there's also the marketplace. Like, it's a little bit like in the financial markets. Like, every trader, every investor has their own little interest, but then there's also an aggregate market price, or an aggregate state of being, state of affairs, which is the, let's say, the daily close of a stock. And that is, I would say, something more objective. It is the cumulative result of all the little actions of the actors. And I think I see the same way science, or even generally society. While we all have our little self-interests, there is such a thing as, I guess, the theories or technologies or companies that actually survive the marketplace of all these little self-interests. Or if you want to even use the Ising model in physics as an analogy, and say, okay, we have all these little interactions between the atoms. We look at the spins up and down, and from there we model how the magnet eventually will look like and act. And we can kind of use that as an analogy for society, and the atoms just being individuals or companies, and so on and so forth. A lot of people will have their own personal ideas about it. There is sort of an objective way to, let's say, this is improving or this is not improving society. This is my fundamental thesis. And I'm happy to discuss it in a very Popperian way. I'm happy for criticism, but this is the way I think about it. So the question, how would Karl Popper feel about Elon Musk, is I think he'd be very happy about him, because that's exactly how Elon Musk thinks. He says, look, the purpose of Tesla and SpaceX and all the other companies is to make society just a little bit better off, to make fellow humans a little bit better off. And actually, even his purchase of Twitter is really just an endeavor to make society a little bit better off, because fundamentally, you're a little bit better off if you have a little bit more freedom. This is the fundamental goal. But what we mean with better off in an objective way is just increase freedom, increase optionality. What is freedom? It's the thing that allows you to do something without a central authority deciding what is and what isn't. So it's coming more innate from you. Now, there are, of course, guidelines. There could be a decentralized way, let's say a Web3 type of way of deciding what is and what isn't, but it is more decentralized. That really is freedom. So fundamentally, freedom is a move towards a world where the person or people who decide what is and what isn't aren't central authorities, but more of an aggregate way. And any kind of knowledge creation, any kind of company, anybody who builds something that helps us get towards a more decentralized way, a more flexible way, a more optionality-driven way, is increasing freedom, and therefore is a little bit better, and therefore is worth pursuing. And it's very important that we're not using words like good, bad, right, wrong. It is just getting us a little bit more on the path of trying to be more innately doing what we're doing without having a central authority telling us what to do. I think you can say that you can invest in something which makes society a little bit better off. And I know people might think, now I'm splitting words here, now I'm Wittgensteinian. No, I'm not. Because a little bit better off just means, look, I don't know if electric cars are good for society or not. I don't know. Maybe they're bad for society. Maybe we will monopolize the supply chain even more, and China will have us by the whatever, by the nuts. But I think for now, at least the way I can see in the near future, an electric car makes us as a society and me as a customer a little bit better off. So I want to go with that. I want to invest in that. And yes, we need to think about the supply chain. We need to think about a lot of things. So by making us better off through the introduction of electric cars, we have to think about a lot of things. And good entrepreneurs do that, and good companies do that, and good investors do that. So I think Karl Popper would be very happy with Musk. He actually would even support Musk's investment in Twitter, because Musk is not buying Twitter because he wants to make money with Twitter. He wants to somehow safeguard free speech. We've said that already in the wake of the acquisition attempt, that free speech, the way we see it, and hopefully the way Musk sees it, is simply a way that somebody, what is free speech? It is who decides what is and what isn't. And free speech is just some way to find a way to decide what is and what isn't, which is not authority driven. So it's not a central authority or the decision making of Twitter or people within Twitter or people within the government or whoever else. Like nobody, hopefully it's an aggregate way. Maybe a Web3 solution could help. Somehow we need to find a way to decide what is and what isn't without having a central authority. A little bit like the financial markets. The financial markets decide what is and what isn't. The financial markets, in my view, are the first Web3 application, starting in, I think, in the 1600s in Amsterdam and all the way until today. That's why the financial markets have been such a successful driver of innovation and wealth creation. It's because they have found a way to allow the freedom of flow of ideas and speech and all of these things within the context of companies. And I think what we could do is we could have the similar application in the actual domain of the speech, which is let the market decide, let a decentralized authority decide what is and what isn't, what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is not true. And the same way, like within the financial markets, we have insider trading, we have antitrust laws, we have a lot of things that try to prevent the destruction of freedom. And this is one of the core issues that Popper points out in his book, and also talking about the Greeks and Plato and all that, where they talk about the problem of the contradiction of freedom itself. Because you can have freedom, like I said, the thing which allows you to do what's innate in you. Well, if it's innate in you to destroy freedom, then that's freedom also. How do you deal with that? Well, you create rules, you create constraints. You can't. Nothing in life can be just absolute. That's impossible. That's my quote. But you have to find a way. And again, how do we make society a little bit better off? By making it a little bit more free. How do we make society a little bit more free? Well, by making it a little bit better off. Wealth creation and freedom are intertwined. One thing leads to another. You can't have one without the other. This is a big lesson that also Russia and China and all these other societies still are learning, that you can't have wealth creation without freedom, even if it's going against your grain. You just can't have it. So to summarize, The Open Society in its 70s by Karl Popper, in my view, is a fundamental epistemological work in which Popper tries to define a moral of contemporary morals, which is the answer to the question, what should I do next? And it applies to people in science as much as investors and anybody in life. What I should do next is, first and foremost, something that makes society a little bit better off. If I follow that doctrine, I think, and doctrine is the wrong word, if I follow that vector, or if I follow that idea, I think I have a good chance to be better off myself. I have a good chance to make society better off. I have a good chance also to have less enemies, more wealth, more happiness, and all of these other things. I am shying away from words like good, happy, bad, all of that, because that's subjective. But I think there is an objective way to think about what makes people better off. It is what makes people a little bit more free. And no matter what, even Elizabeth Warren, even Bernie Sanders, even Vladimir Putin, I don't know how far left you want to go, and I don't know how far right you want to go. If you make people a little bit more free, it either makes them better people or softens them and makes them a bit less bad. So this is what we're trying to achieve at Orange Capital Partners, and this is what we're taking away from the Open Society and its enemies. So we have David Deutsch's The Beginning of Infinity as part of our principle stack. So this is already very deeply ingrained in what we do at Orange Capital Partners. We don't have rules, we don't have algorithms, we have principles. And I know now we're on a very slippery slope because somebody that we absolutely disrespect, and I don't want to mention names here, but there's other people in the investment community that we think are at best just misleading people, and maybe at worst even con artists and fraudulent. They are using the word principle also, and we don't want to be associated with them, but unfortunately it's a word that just fits very well. Principles are simply a truth or a proposition that underlines certain action. Okay, so it's a guideline, it's an idea on which I base my action. And it's better to have principles than rules because things are very, very volatile. There's no historicism, no sociologism or anything like that. Nothing is predictable from the past because human creativity and human knowledge is unpredictable. We don't know how to program. If I knew how to program it, I would understand it. Well, we don't know how to program creativity. We don't know how to program wealth creating companies. How would you program it? We don't know. So we are really exposed to sort of a real-time decision making of a more or less random thing. At least that's how we perceive it in this multiverse that we live in here. And because it's random, of course, it's very difficult to say, okay, how can we even be in a business where success is random? Well, we hope that by having a principle stack and adhering to that principle stack with discipline, and also be open enough to change it if necessary, that we can thread that fine sort of needle and hopefully, in the end, deliver to our customers our promise, which is generating wealth by investing in fundamental new concepts and engineering practices with large impact. And large impact is, in fact, a large impact on making our society a little bit better off. This is the goal of Orange Capital Partners. This is the purpose of Orange Capital Partners. The purpose of this particular episode was to discuss the open society and its enemies, which is sort of the underlying book which underlines the beginning of infinity, which is part of our principle stack. So this is kind of like a bit of the ancestry of our principle stack. And I think Karl Popper is a very interesting person because he helps you rethink life in a fundamental way, but also in a practical way. He lets you think, be creative, be abstract, but he gives you practical advice, what to do next. The fundamental problem of what should I do next right now? What I should do next right now is invest in a company. Let's say as a hedge fund manager now, I should put my capital to work in a situation that is making society a little bit better off. And to finish, also the answer to the question, how would Karl Popper have felt about Elon Musk? He would have felt very good about him, and Musk would have felt very good about Popper. They're on the same line of thinking. Thank you.